3 weeks.
Started early, yeah.
Yeah, 3 weeks. How about you?
About 27 days, give or take.
Really?
Not counting though.
Yeah,
Where are you, Kira?
I'm based out of Chicago right now.
Are you really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I didn't know that. I would say get together with Jack at some point, but you guys, nobody can get together with anybody. So, but he's back there. In fact, Jack might join us for a second via FaceTime. It's his birthday, so he's having a birthday dinner, but he might join us. You're in Chicago? That's cool.
Yo, sorry to interrupt. So we're about to go live. We're gonna start off by doing a quick commercial. What's up, everyone? Welcome, everyone. We got Tib, we got Brandon, we got Juthika. We're gonna do a quick commercial. It's gonna be like a minute and a half, and then we'll get into it. So this is gonna be
my
starting.
fellow
If anyone
Americans,
is on Twitter,
just
YouTube,
like many
you
of
can
you,
see what everyone else
my
is
family and I are social distancing.
But Brandon quit him.
And it's important that everyone take this seriously so that we can beat this thing.
Where's the link to like the
And
YouTube
Joe,
live?
if you're watching this,
Oh man, it's slightly
6
delayed.
foot
It's so
distance
weird.
from everyone, buddy. Actually, that's probably a good rule for you to follow at all times.
Pretty smooth for me.
But anyway, Michelle and I are doing fine. But we did just run out of good shows to watch on Netflix. I gotta tell you though, I just started reading up on this whole Bitcoin thing, and boy oh boy, I think I'm falling down the, what do you Bitcoiners call it? Falling down the rabbit hole. As Michelle and I waited 3 hours just to get inside Costco, we ran into this gentleman who did a hell of a job pitching Bitcoin to us. Jameson Lopp was his name, a real stand-up guy. And he has a great website full of resources. I'm learning so much. I just listened to the audible of The Bitcoin Standard from Sapien the Moose, and I just started Jan Pritzker's book, Inventing Bitcoin. Michelle, if you're ordering more supplies, you better be checking on deals on Lolly and Fold. We need to be stacking sats. Yes, whatever we can, damn it. Stacking sats, right? Am I saying that right? Sup, freaks. Anyway, folks, I just thought I'd share with you what I'm learning. But basically, in the words of the great Murray Rothbard, what has the government done to our money? The more I learn about how we've screwed up the money, the more obvious it is to me that Bitcoin fixes this. There are just so many misconceptions about Bitcoin. But America, I've decided it's time I help clear up those misconceptions. For example, I used to think Bitcoin wasted all this energy. But today, I heard this real all-American guy from Philly. His name's Marty Bent. He's got this podcast, and I heard him explain perfectly and rationally how Bitcoin is actually good for the environment. Heck, it's the real new Green Deal. I don't know about you, America, but I'm a believer in this Bitcoin thing. Might be a good idea for me to get some in case this thing catches on. Well, folks, my fellow citizens, I'm going to continue doing my own research, but stay safe and stay tuned. Michelle, did my VR headset arrive? I need it for Udi's VR Bitcoin meetup. What? Normally I can't borrow it. This Bitcoin thing?
All right, y'all. Thanks for the patience there. It took a while.
No worries, man.
All right. Bitcoin for America.
So Bitcoin for America. Welcome to the third Drinks in Quarantine. We got a hell of a group here. I think we're going to just start off really quick. We got a couple of rules. Oh, I don't know why that's showing. So we got a couple of rules. No shilling altcoins. You can talk about altcoins, but you can't shill them. Okay? Can't say print. If you say print, you got to drink. You can't say drink. If you say drink, you got to drink. So, cheers. What's everyone sipping on?
Wine.
Pastis.
Representing Saskatchewan, Canada.
Do we got Jack Mahler's on the bottom there?
Yeah, you do.
Dude, it's like Zoom Inception.
Yo, happy birthday, Jack.
So how's everyone doing?
Hey, Jack, can you hear?
Yo, yeah.
Nice. Happy birthday,
All
buddy.
right. I think this is earliest for Neil here, so let's what Neil's drinking.
To be honest, I don't normally drink in the morning, but just for you guys, I've added some.
Hey,
Nice.
we'll take your word for it.
Nice.
If you guys
Neil, where are you?
kick off some
Yeah,
alcohol,
where you
Bitcoin
you at,
magazine.
Neil?
I'm in Thailand, Chiang Mai.
All right, so we got one Asia. Everyone else is in the U.S.
Canada.
Montreal, Canada.
The war zone of New York.
Yeah, we got a few
Cheers,
Canadians.
Steve.
What is that? Is that
Colorado.
milk? Tim, what are you drinking?
No, this is pastis. It's from
Oh, yeah.
France, from where I'm from. Yeah.
Gotcha,
But
gotcha.
it brings back the southern drinks.
Nice. Yeah, sorry for my ignorant comment.
Nah, man. It's like, this is very niche drink.
So what's everyone thinking about
We can
these
mix the
days?
wine and beer.
Trading Bitcoin and selling weed, I guess. What we do.
How's the dispensary doing these days?
Well, I mean, it's been really stressful. We decided to close our stores a few weeks ago because it was just like Boulder is a tourist town. We had all the ski resorts closed because there was these outbreaks up in the mountains, and so people were coming down into Boulder, and then assuming that they were going to probably go on quarantine, people were stocking up, and we're having. I mean, it's a good problem to have, but it actually wasn't. Where we had tons of people coming into our dispensaries to stock up, and our employees were really scared, and one of our employees got COVID, and so we just closed all the way. And then suddenly, miraculously, the governor of Colorado was like, okay, marijuana is an essential business, so we'll close the restaurants and bars, but cannabis dispensaries can stay open. But the law required up until last week that you had to sell within the confines of a licensed store. And we didn't want people coming into the store, so we stayed closed. And then they changed the law. It's amazing what they'll do in an emergency to bend regulations that a day before were so strict. And so now we do curbside pickup. We're using Jack's app as a contactless payment thing for those who are tech savvy enough to figure it out. And so yeah, we're about 1/10 of our normal sales at this point. We're hoping to stay alive like any small business, and we'll see what happens.
I told these guys my dad and I started a brokerage firm shortly before the crash of '87. And so now I've opened a store in a tourist town shortly before collapse and tourism.
Before a pandemic.
So I still got my timing.
Yeah, good.
The video.
I would sort of have thought that quarantine would have increased marijuana consumption.
Well, I think
Essential item now.
No?
No, I think it probably does. I mean, the fact that here in Colorado, they kept liquor stores and dispensaries open as essential businesses. I just think a lot of people stocked up and now they're running out. It's been about 2 or 3 weeks since we went on lockdown, and we're expecting a little surge before 4/20, April 20th, which is next week. So yeah, we'll get a little surge of curbside pickup. It won't be anything near. I mean, our business is all tourist driven, and the tourists aren't here. So we look at a town like ours that's tons of cute little mom and pop small businesses, and I don't know if any of them are coming back.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Is anyone applying for the SBA stuff, the PPP stuff?
Well, I'll tell you that they are, but believe that this is so insane. So since marijuana is a Schedule I drug and federally illegal, we as a cannabis industry business or anybody in the cannabis industry cannot avail themselves of any of the federal tax relief, none of the small business administration loans, and we found out this is last week, anybody who helps our business, like fixes our air conditioning or does our website, they also cannot avail themselves of the small business administration loans because they touch the cannabis industry. So there's all of this incredible cascading fallout from this of people who are not going to have helped the cannabis business with their website. It's insane.
It's terrible.
I mean, luckily some of that stuff would be hard to prove.
Yeah, I mean, what they say is, well, when you apply, there's a fine and possible jail time if you lie about, being associated with anything illegal. I just have a feeling they're going to waive a lot of these restrictions. I agree.
Yeah. That's one of the big things that we're seeing from like venture capital perspective as well, is some of the SBA with like VC backed companies are getting like all kind of screwed up because they're like basically associating like the employee account across the portfolio, not in the individual company. So, but I agree. I think there's gonna be a lot of like changes that they're gonna have to make.
That's insane.
Yeah, it's wild. But
Yeah.
Jack, your video using Strike at the dispensary was really cool though.
Yes. Hey, Jack, can you hear? Here, let me turn up the volume.
I love the Zoom inception.
I don't know if I'm.
Can you hear Jack, guys? Talk. Jack.
Yo.
Yo.
What up?
We can hear him.
Hey, CK, can I give Jack the link?
Yeah, you can, of course.
Sure. Okay. Jack, I'll get
Imagine he said no.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Yeah, this
It's gonna
is
screw up all the
crew.
tiles, man. I got 3, 3, 3, and 3. It's gonna screw it up.
We need to add 3 more. I think Bitcoin Tina might jump on. Who hasn't chimed in? Parker, Juthica, Neil, what's up?
Hey. Yeah, it's hard to chime in without using the word print, which is the first thing that comes to mind. I don't think I've met most of you
Got a
guys.
drink.
Bottoms up. Yeah, someone else needs to.
I gotta.
It's gonna be hard.
But yeah, so I'm in New York, and so we're seeing different businesses, but same sort of local businesses going through all of the pain of shutting down, and then plus on top of that, all of the it seems like an administrative nightmare. While it's ostensibly good that there are these stimulus programs out there and PPP and stuff, it seems like an administrative nightmare to for the companies and for the banks to kind of be able to actually get them into action in the timeframes that are meaningful to a lot of the small companies. So fingers crossed for everybody who has risk in that space.
We do have some of you kind of popping in on Periscope and see what people are asking also. We have some topics to go through a bit structured, but to start with something light, from Periscope, we've got what shows everyone has been binge watching from Paul Meister.
Oh, baby. I'm
Somebody
a
has
movie
something,
addict.
Nothing
what?
for me. My wife's watching Arrested Development right now. I've been catching pieces of it. It's actually pretty hilarious, but
Rick and Morty season 4, man. I had to catch up.
There you go.
Has anyone ever seen Criminal Minds?
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to hate the show and now I'm completely addicted.
Anybody into sci-fi or what? I'm like, I ran out of Black Mirror and Love, Drugs, and Robots. Now I'm on Tales from the Loop on Amazon. It's pretty good.
How about the Expanse, Tom? You touched Expanse yet?
You know what? I keep seeing the rating and I just can't like click into it. I need like a free 12 hours.
Yeah.
It's the best sci-fi TV show on right now.
I got to head up there, Dispensary, and then I'll be in the mode for 12 hours to watch it.
Wise. Who's into nature documentaries? 7 Worlds, One Planet. Another Attenborough, fantastic.
Def check that out.
Let's say I'm on Ozark season 3. If anyone's watching that,
Finish that baby.
Ending.
Good season.
I'm excited.
I watched a documentary on Prime that was called The Man Who Skied Down Everest. And it was a documentary from like the 60s, it felt like, the way that it was shot, but it was pretty interesting. Dude trekked up Everest and then skied down I wasn't all the way to the peak, but it was very close to the peak and survived to tell the story. So it was pretty good.
Insane.
Pretty wild.
I want to see somebody do that base jumping. What's the thing where you have the wings?
The squirrel thing?
Yeah, that thing. I want to see someone do that off Everest.
I think the technical term is squirrel thing.
wingsuit.
We got a happy birthday, Jack, in the Periscope also, so happy birthday.
Yeah, what up, Jack?
What's up? Thank you, man.
How old are you, Jack?
26.
Okay. Young.
Happy birthday, man.
Birthday.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
What'd you get for your birthday?
Some tonic, a little bit of whiskey. Nothing too big. Nothing too big.
Wingsuit is apparently the technical term for those wingsuits, by the way.
All right, good. I'm going on Amazon. I'm getting one.
Here we go. What's the most insane kind of thing like extreme sport anyone's done here?
Extreme what?
Like wingsuit jumping. Anything crazy? Anybody paraglided or anything like that?
Bungee jump.
Bungee jump. Let's guess.
That's kind of.
Skydive.
Oh.
Skydive, yeah.
Yeah.
What's the one where you're like? Oh, oops. What's the one where you're on the back of a boat and they just like they drive and you go up?
Oh,
Parasailing.
Parasail.
I've done that one.
All right,
Jack, what's up with that microphone you got there?
To be honest, dude, I was getting a lot of complaints from my appearances on the internet, and I got peer pressure to buy it. So I talked. No, that's the truth. I just got peer pressure to cop it. Do I sound okay?
Yeah.
No, you sound good. It just looks kind of crazy.
It's like an egg.
Sometimes it sounds better, Jack. It doesn't sound like clear right now. You sure it's on?
No. No, I'm not sure at all. I don't know how to use it, but I bought it because I traditionally sounded like shit when I joined calls and interviews and stuff. So if it's not working, that'd be a true shame. I put a lot of work into hooking this thing up. But I'll look into it if I still sound.
Bought it for the style or for the sound, proficiencies?
Oh man, for the style. But it's for the efficiency if possible.
What do you guys think about the Bitcoin back rewards with Fold?
Oh man, I can't wait to have it in Canada. That's the only thing that frustrates me right now.
The Canadians are not down with cash back?
We're all the world always ignores us.
Yes.
It's like
You guys are getting so much stimulus. Why do you got to use your credit card? We're only getting 1,200 over here, man.
And it's a debit card, right?
I haven't seen any money yet.
Yeah. Has anybody gotten their 1,200?
Nope.
You know what? Actually, in Canada, they did a mistake, and they sent. The first mistake was they set the unemployment insurance at $2,000, which was above the salary of certain workers. So they had to raise the salaries. And then second mistake is they sent that insurance help twice to some people. So some people got $4,000 on the first payment. I hope they get to keep it. Yeah.
Jeez.
Free money.
Does Canada count it as taxable income? Because that's what the 12K or 1,200 in the US is taxable.
It's actually taxable?
Oh man.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's taxable income.
Kidding.
It's income.
My God.
Oh man.
I think it probably would be. Not sure.
I mean, people are going to have $1,200 on their income for next year because no one's going to have a job. So.
Who's moving to a rural area and building a bunker when we can finally leave our houses?
It's pretty good rural. I'm living rural, and I don't know, like from what I hear, like who's in New York right now? Like it's crazy over there. Yeah. You sort of don't even really notice. A lot of businesses obviously are closed and stuff, but it's not the same vibe, I guess, as I see on the media and stuff. A lot of people aren't too concerned, but yeah, bunker would be cool. I got to start building that.
Okay. And one question from Periscope: with these checks going out, how many people do you think are going to be buying Bitcoin with that cash?
Good question.
All my friends are going to do it.
People will be buying food, but I'm not sure.
But I agree with Steve. I think most of it will go towards like essentials, like food, rent, that type of stuff before he goes to Bitcoin, especially with most of them out of jobs now.
Yeah, what is it over like? Oh, it's over 10 million already that filed for unemployment in the U.S.
I think 16.
16.5.
16.5.
Yeah.
The screen says
It's
17
insane.
million, but that might be rounding up.
Yeah, more
But
of
look,
the more of the $2 trillion that the Fed announced today that's going to go buy corporate bonds will probably end up in Bitcoin than the individual checks.
Oh man, that's sad.
Yeah, that's probably a good place to start with some of the experienced folks we have from the traditional side too. But thoughts on this, on Fed policies, new stuff announced today? Maybe Parker and Juska. Parker, if you have any more thoughts on the new 2.3?
Yeah, my view of it is just that, it's just crazy the scale. I think that, ultimately, obviously there's huge risks, but that, when people just continue to see the size of the Fed's balance sheet and how drastically it's rising and how quickly it's rising, I think that, I wouldn't be surprised if they stopped reporting that chart, because it just screams out to everybody that not only are they not in control, but just to the extent of kind of the systemic issues in the system. And I think that there's reason to have a lot of fears about it, but we really haven't seen the extent of the economic follow through, and there's just no quick fix to that. And I think that the risk that the Fed has is by going as aggressively as they had, as quickly as they have, that when the economic follow through comes and businesses don't reopen, there's no amount of Fed money that can solve that. And if they've kind of taken as drastic of measures as they have, it's just, no one knows where it stops. Today they added in, the fallen angels, in terms of they're now going to go buy, junk bonds, or at least the highest rated of the junk bonds. But really, it's kind of like, once you give them an inch, the market's going to take a mile. And I think it's likely the Fed's balance sheet gets to 8 to 10 trillion in a matter of months. And when you think about what the Fed's balance sheet did over the course of 2009 to 14, it took 5 years to grow $3 trillion. So
It's not only that, right? They're also not just buying traditional assets; they're also buying ETFs now.
Yeah, and they're also issuing. They're also participating in primary issuance, which is one of the crazier things in terms of the Fed directly issuing credit. So, yeah, I think that the positive side of this is that it only accelerates, and it's woken up at least a lot of people in my circles that haven't been interested in Bitcoin. It's certainly woken a lot of people up. So
I don't find it surprising. I expect the U.S. government to spend enormously. I expect the balance sheets to grow. I would not be surprised to see a double the size of the spending by the U.S. government this year. I don't expect it to end. I think the numbers will be well beyond what most people consider to be shocking. I consider this the beginning of the end. And I think that most people don't yet believe that this is more than a one-off. And since I've been expecting it, I don't think it's a one-off. I think this is an ongoing thing. I would not be surprised to see a $5 trillion deficit this year. I expect the Fed to be holding rates and controlling rates across the entire curve, monetizing the entire curve. And I expect the numbers to be, I would not be surprised to see a $20 trillion Fed balance sheet within a few years. I would not be surprised to see the U.S. government spending well in excess of $8 trillion. And that number will rise. I think the system is completely broken. I've thought it's broken for a long time. I continue to think it's broken. And it will take a little while for people to come to understand this. None of this is surprising.
How do people wrap their heads around the stock market going up, but then people being unemployed? It's like, how is a company like Boeing doing so well with the stock price? Like, it's this huge boost when they're not producing any planes.
Because the people who are involved with stocks think this is a replay of 2008 and 9, and the critical difference this time is you're going to start to see velocity. I don't think this is an end to Corona. My wife commented to me that she reads on social media, on places like Facebook, that people don't want to go to the hospitals because they don't want to die alone. when businesses start to open up, you're going to resume contagion. If numbers that I've read are correct, that 3 out of 4 people are in their houses, you're not going to get tremendous contagion. But we're either going to have contagion or we're going to start to get back to work. You can't have it both ways. So I see this as being something which is ongoing. I don't think COVID is a one-off thing. And I think that the economy was already broken and the global financial markets were already broken. I don't see how this does not accelerate adoption, accelerate the price. And most of the world who has ignored Bitcoin continue to say things like, oh, the government won't allow it. So we have the perfect storm happening here. You're going to have the halving come in about 30 some odd days, 32, 33 days. People are going to begin to wake up gradually. I've also noticed a slight change in tone from people who are gold guys now mentioning and talking about Bitcoin. You're going to start to see money slip into this. Will be over 20,000 in the not distant future. That could be 6 months, that could be 3 months, that could be 9 months. But once you're over 20,000, the zeitgeist starts to shift.
Tina, welcome to the show.
Where the zeitgeist was going to shift. And
I agree.
You're going to see some really shocking things.
I agree. Juthika, I think John mentioned you at the beginning. Do you have it? I mean, what are you seeing here with all this printing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the as Parker said, the sheer magnitude of it, whether it's compared to 2008. I mean, obviously the much different crisis in nature, and it will be interesting to see how this one plays out, because as opposed to 2008, at the time it felt like it reverberated through everything, and particularly in New York it did. But I think it's nothing compared to the scope of what people are feeling here, and it's not the same as just it's not the same as injecting capital and liquidity into the system when it really is truly a liquidity crisis, when there are real assets, real loans that they can take on, and they believe that the asset prices will recover. This is different when the stimulus needs to go towards people who just are not working, are not, companies are not producing, but people need the funds obviously for to pay their bills and, eat food and stuff. So I think this is, having lived through 2008, this is completely different in nature. And I think, as it pertains to Bitcoin, as Tina was kind of saying, I think when we come out of this, and I don't know if this is not necessarily a right now thing, but definitely you're seeing in the forums and, the quants and stuff, they're talking about, as we come out of this crisis, Bitcoin versus gold, and which seems to be more of an appropriate investment or allocation of capital. And back in 2008, 2009, 2010, for obvious reasons, Bitcoin wasn't even a part of that conversation. So I think it's, when people do start to look to reallocate capital, and at that point will also be when people are actually thinking, I think, a little bit more about the inflationary side, whereas right now it's just the health side. There's no question that it'll be part of the conversation among larger asset managers for sure.
So Parker mentioned that he's getting kind of increased, messages from folks interested in Bitcoin from kind of old colleagues and whatnot. Are you getting the same thing? And Parker, what are those people who are reaching out to you? What is their interest exactly? Are they saying, hey, how can I get into this? What do you recommend? Juice, are you getting more hit up more about Bitcoin now?
Yeah, I mean, I can just say that the consistent thread is that there are people that have never bought Bitcoin before, and there are probably people who have been paying attention on the periphery, and generally, they're people, even in the oil and gas business, but generally higher net worth individuals, family office, people that see what's going on and recognize that it's insane, and also have previously, had some knowledge of Bitcoin but hadn't been involved in any ways. And it's someone saying, "Hey, just how do I buy this? Show me, teach me." So, but the consistent theme is people that have never ever had exposure to Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I think it's people who, in the traditional world, who follow Ray Dalio, read the kinds of things that he's saying, and now take a different frame to it, knowing that Bitcoin exists. And I think this is where, depending on how kind of Bitcoin and us handle the marketing around the halvening, it is really the perfect time. And in a way, if the circumstances of the Fed over the last month or so hadn't happened, I don't think the halvening would be as much of a catalyst for new people to get into Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
How do you guys feel about the way Bitcoin's performed since Black Thursday and that huge dump?
I mean, there's no question it's been very, very correlated to the market. Sometimes if I want to see what the stock market's doing, I actually just look at Bitcoin price and then it's kind of clear what's happening in the broader market. And that's okay. You know, it's not, I don't think that that's like necessarily a bad thing. And I think that's, if you're trading, it's probably interesting for reevaluating certain lead lag signals. But for whatever reason is driving it, whether it's become a self-fulfilling thing because people are, you know, broadly treating it as a signal or what, it's, you know, definitely just moving with the broader market right now.
I have an opinion on
It seems
that.
it's been oh yeah, go ahead.
I have an opinion on that. I think this looks an awful lot like late 2018, early 2019. The volumes are enormous. I would not be surprised to see us sell off a little bit, go sideways, and then see an explosion out of here, whether it be a month or 2 or 3 down the line. It feels an awful lot like this. And from years of trading in markets, I have noticed over the years and have heard comments along these lines that secondary bottoms look and feel worse than primary bottoms. This feels like a secondary bottom to me, and I would not be surprised to see a real explosion out of here at some point, but I would also not be surprised to see us linger and fool some people into thinking that things don't look that good. But I think you've transferred a lot of Bitcoin into hodlers' hands. I think that sell-off was actually incredibly positive because it strangles supply. And so this just feels an awful lot like what we saw back in that prior period. And I would not be surprised to see a repeat. And I would not be surprised to see us languish for another 2, 3, 4 months. That would not surprise me in the least. And have an explosion out, $2,000-$3,000 explosion that just doesn't look back.
Tib.
No, I was going to say it seems like Bitcoin has been leading the other markets, right? So like before the big bloody Thursday, like it sort of crashed over the weekend, and then everybody followed. So it's funny, like, you know, there was this narrative on Twitter, especially like that these were the sort of weak institutional hands that sort of bought opportunistically before, you know, during the back launch and all that. And so all of these less convinced hodlers, I would say, sort of got shaken out. And so to Tina's point now, what seems pretty exciting is that this is just the really base, sort of very strong, you know, base hodler that will not sell. I'm not going to sell, basically. So, you know, we'll see what this does.
What if you're forced to sell? Like, what if this drags out? Because I think people that wouldn't sell under normal conditions will be forced to sell. Like, how does that play into how people are thinking about this in the long to medium term?
Personally, I know I'm privileged and I have the you know, the luck of being in that position. So I'll do anything it takes to not sell. You know, whether it's personally, my burn rate has been going down, being home, not seeing friends, not going out, not going to restaurants and all that. So if anything, I've been stacking more, man. So, but you know, I guess I'm a privileged guy. So it's not the same for everyone who's out there and who lost their jobs. So.
Neil,
we'll see. But again, like, I think as well, I was just going to add, like, it's interesting that the halving, right? The reduction in supply of Bitcoin is coming at the same time. So it sort of is like, and we joke about this on Twitter, but it seems to be the perfect Hollywood type of, you know, script. On one end, you got the crazy liquidity injection, quantitative easing. I do not know how many trillions of dollars have been printed. And on the other hand, you have this quantitative like tightening or hardening that's happening in Bitcoin in like less than $5,000 now. So I don't know, like, even if there's less buy pressure every day because people have less disposable income, the supply is shrinking in like less than a month. So whatever, you know?
True.
But anyway.
Tib, you need a drink because you said the P word. Neil, what's up?
You're right. Bitcoin City, you should drink too because you typed it. Hey,
and I also said the D word. Man, this is difficult.
So, if I think if a large portion of the people in this Zoom call are starting to have to, if things are so bad that people are having to start to break into their Bitcoin holdings, we're talking like the rest of the world is in even worse shape. And if that's happening, like we can imagine, like given the amount of monetary stimulus there's been already, like things are going to be going totally crazy by then, and I can't see the Bitcoin price not reacting to that. Fiat will start to become even less valuable, and conversely, I think Bitcoin will start to become more valuable, and it will drive people towards it. And we were asking, like, how many
Neil,
people?
Can you give us a zoom into Thailand and kind of the just the vibe there, and Chiang Mai, central bank? Anything from Thailand there?
I don't follow the news. I'll be honest. I definitely don't follow the Thai news, and generally, I don't really follow the global news very much. So I can't really comment on that.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
What's everyone's estimate on when we're getting back to like bars and stuff like that? I'm thinking June 1st in New York City.
You're optimistic.
That's optimistic,
man.
yeah.
Pretty.
I might be going a little crazy here. It's basing into my decision.
I mean, I suspect we're gonna see underground bars. Like we're gonna see. So in Montreal, every spring there's all the terraces that flourish around everywhere, and everybody's waiting for that because the winter here is so long, right? And so desperate, and there's like lack of light. It's minus 30 degrees.
Depressing.
And the spring is always very
depressing.
depressing. Yeah, I mean, like the winter is a beautiful, like it's very sunny and cold, but the spring season is kind of weird because you get like slushy and everything. But anyway, everybody's waiting for that season for terraces to come back, for people to go and chill and go have drinks, and so I suspect we're gonna see almost like illegal type of gatherings, and we're seeing it already a little bit here and there. 'Cause there's a lot of French people also here in Montreal, so I guess there's this bloodline of revolutionaries that I hope we'll get to push for. But anyway, that's how I see things here. What about New York? I'm curious though, because June 1st seems to be pretty pretty.
Yeah,
bullish,
Tom,
pretty
talk about
optimistic.
that. Why are you feeling that?
I read a post yesterday or last night. I'm not sure if Zuko shared it. It was that woman's story about how she thinks that we're in the height right now and the infection got here months earlier than China said and stuff like that. And, I'm kind of optimistic that most people in the US may have it and be asymptomatic and be sharing it and have gotten over it, especially young people. I think that's, I don't think it's 100% chance, but I think it's worth kind of thinking about and exploring that. And if that's the case, then we might all be back to work sooner than we think. I don't want to dismiss how serious it is, but I think people should think about, if most people have already had this and they're young.
I read a study
going
that
back to work.
Yeah, it comes from a guy in his 20s. We got someone on Periscope saying, "No way, I'll be back to a bar on June 1st." Stuff like.
Well, June 4th. No one's going to go out during the week, but we'll see.
There's a study that just came out. It's not peer reviewed yet, but it was talking about the antibody resistance. So basically, like when you get sick, supposedly you develop the antibodies. And in the only study that they've done on this topic, it turns out that about a third of the people who get sick and were released from the hospital don't have sufficient antibodies to actually fight off the disease again.
Right.
Oh, yeah, that's bad.
It's very bad.
That was
Like I said, it's not peer reviewed, but it's the first study that, to my knowledge, that's been done. And they said it was a third of people. So it's not about having antibodies or not having antibodies. It's about meeting a certain threshold. And a third of the people who had the virus did not have the threshold.
All right, I'm changing my date, guys, after that new information. So.
I don't mean to be a downer, but I'm not optimistic.
June?
No, we're now going with July 1st.
I think we're going to be wearing masks for a really long time. And I think we're going to be in restaurants trying to eat under our masks. and straws and stuff.
Not proper use of PPE.
Weird.
Are y'all seeing people wearing masks now? I'm in Nashville right now. Nobody's wearing masks.
Everybody's wearing masks here.
Yeah.
Everyone in SF. Everyone in SF.
Pretty much everyone in LA as well.
In my rural town, I was at the grocery store today. I only saw maybe 2 people.
Wow.
Is anyone else rural, or are you guys all in cities?
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think it seems like there is a bit of a different vibe in cities than rural, but I was actually surprised to see it.
Yo, John, how was that tornado by you guys?
It was pretty brutal for the parts that hit. I wasn't in town when it happened, but I mean, it knocked out some kind of major hotspots in terms of bars and restaurants.
Jeez.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there's already some disaster relief coming to Nashville, and then Corona hit. Question for
unbelievable. The last thing we need is any kind of natural disaster.
Can you imagine? Like, what if a hurricane season was bad this year?
I know. I mean, how's that going to work? I agree.
Yeah, I was actually in Wuhan first week of January when there started kind of rumors about what was happening the last week of December, and so it's been really weird to see it escalate like it has. And I was there, and I was in China, and I didn't see it all coming like this, and so.
John, you brought it.
Yeah.
You bastard.
But it's crazy to see it escalate like this. Question on the Periscope, not to get back to price too much. We got somebody really wanting all-time high price prediction from Bitcoin Tina and anyone else.
No way. No, bad question. Moving on.
Bad question.
All right.
My partners would kill me if I answered that. I don't think I can.
So, what are like the different measures that are being taken by governments to kind of try to flatten the curve? Like we're seeing in Singapore and South Korea, everyone has to have an app. We're seeing in the U.S., part of the bill that was signed says that they have to come up with something in the next few months. Like, do you guys think that
I have a strange story from Montreal?
Like, yeah, let's hear some stories and thoughts.
Yeah. So in Quebec, 2 days ago, it was published on a mainstream media outlet. A couple living in two different places, right? And so the girl came to see the guy, and they spent the evening together. And a neighbor called them on that. They basically caught that the girl was visiting the guy and that she didn't live here, and so they called the police. Police showed up. They came into the house. This is documented. Like, this is real reporting. And they basically split the couple, told the girl to come back to her place, and gave them a fine. And the fine in Quebec are between $1,000, so it's Canadian, so it's like 700 US, to $6,000. And I think this is insane what we're seeing. Like the velocity at which the removal of civil liberties and personal rights is being taken away from citizens for the sake of national security or public health is it's like collective health is more important than individual health. It feels like, which doesn't make sense because collective health is sort of the sum of individual health, right, for every people. So anyway, pretty shocking example for sure. It may be anecdotal, and it sort of it seems to be like a pretty like sensational story. So it may not be the case for everyone, but it's still, I hope it's only an outlier, but it's still a story that happened recently here. So yeah, pretty crazy.
We have similar stuff going on in the US where people are getting ticketed for just being outside. I happen to live across the hall from a lawyer, and the governor had put out a statement about how, no one's allowed to go outside. No groups of over 10 or 50 or whatever it is allowed to congregate. And according to my neighbor friend, the lawyer, he says that it's unconstitutional and it literally wouldn't hold up in any court. The idea is just to get people who wouldn't dig into it to comply for the short term. So in the US, these things, they may work for 2-3 months, but if a business really wanted to stay open in the US, they absolutely could, because once they went to court, it would hold up. That being said, like most people are complying because they don't want to get the coronavirus. But yeah, I don't know. The same is definitely not true in Canada.
Yeah, the last bar standing here in Nashville was Kid Rock's bar on Broadway. They made a big stink about closing. Just a funny anecdote there. Hey Neil, what are you seeing in the UK in terms of like civil liberties and government?
Well, I mean, it's getting really bad. I mean, I haven't been to the UK in the last few months, so I haven't seen it firsthand. But some people may have been following my tweet thread on the topic. I think the more kind of egregious one recently was there's a policeman on like national TV doing a public statement threatening to check people's shopping baskets in the store at I think you guys call it a register, to make sure that people were quoting only for essential goods.
I saw that. That's insane.
And like, it's such, I mean, they haven't implemented that yet. And he was like, we're not doing it yet, but if people keep on breaking the rules, then we're going to do it. And it's like, these guys shouldn't be making threats like that. They're like, the police are there to serve the people in the UK and keep them safe, mainly like keep their property safe and keep them safe from criminals, not to kind of threaten to go through their shopping baskets. And like, that's one of the worst things I've seen, but there's all sorts of, I mean, we know that, for instance, that encryption bans are going to be coming in the wake of this. There's like every single day now on the BBC, people, the BBC are talking about how people are spreading misinformation, rumors through private groups. So they've already kind of got social media on lockdown, so they don't really talk about that anymore. It's very difficult to do it on Twitter and Facebook and stuff. So now they're worried about private groups and people like sending messages to each other. We just saw that WhatsApp recently implemented you can only forward a message to 5 people maximum. And like, there's going to be all sorts of very, very scary things coming in. And like, certainly we can expect them to step some of this back once this thing is over. Although we don't know what the criteria of over is yet. Let's say like it comes to like a consensus that things are over, they'll step things back, but we'll be a lot further along the road for all of these things they've been wanting to implement over the last few years than we were when we started. And we know that as well, once this is over, they'll just keep on ramping it up again. So it's definitely very concerning. And like, I don't think any amount of kind of voting or complaining about it or activism online is going to change it. Like, some really fundamental things are going to have to change before we can kind of revert that trend.
We had that in LA recently. I think some of you guys may have seen, like, I think Marty Bent retweeted it, but I want to say like last weekend there was someone just paddleboarding out in the ocean by himself and like had like 3 or 4 speedboats that came up and like cornered him. There's like 4 or 5 police units that were like waiting on the beach to like arrest him. So it's been pretty like crazy to see that in LA. And then as Kira mentioned, I think that's kind of an interesting note as well. Like, haven't really seen as much like outcry or kind of backlash from some of like the more constitutional protected rights. Like, I think you see a couple like churches here and there, but like I would have thought that like the churches would have been like more outspoken of like freedom of assembly, freedom of like religion and that type of stuff. So it's interesting to see kind of as you mentioned that we're kind of giving up some of those civil liberties and freedoms for the collective health. And then as Neil just brought up, I think that's another scary part is you see a lot of the stuff that happened in the Patriot Act that were supposed to be kind of scaled back and brought back in, and it hasn't. So it's like, what are the things that are going to happen this time that say, oh, it's only going to be temporary, but then end up kind of being more permanent?
Yeah.
To me, that's...
Yeah.
Can I add something on the positive side of that? So yeah, we are, rightly really afraid of, these more severe invasions of our privacy being institutionalized and then just not ever drawn back. But what's also happening, what we're finding, is that in emergency, at least in our business, and I never really thought that this might happen, is that the state and the local government decided to ban or to loosen restrictions that were so strict for so long on let's just say the cannabis industry, but I know it's happening in a few other industries. Now we're allowed to suddenly, overnight, allowed to deliver cannabis outside of inside physical location to the curbside. It's going to be really hard to roll that back once we sort of like loosen everything up, open up the society, whatever. It's going to be there'll be a real public outcry of like, wait, I don't want to go back into those stores. I want to keep pulling up in my car to get my cannabis.
What are the other industries?
What's that?
What are the other industries? You said it's happening in cannabis. What are the other areas where it's happening?
Liquor, like in our town, for example.
Liquor delivery.
Not just liquor delivery, but like the restaurants here were suddenly overnight allowed to sell liquor to a walk-up. And I'll tell you, we've gone and gotten margaritas almost every day this week, and just in the middle of the street saying, "Hey, hello, officer," and nobody's done anything because they just don't have the will to do it. But on the other hand, I also did see in a neighboring town a father was playing with his daughter in the park, playing ball, and he got arrested for being outside in public in a park. So yeah. So anyway, I'm just thinking that I hadn't thought about the flip side of this, which is that when they do kind of like allow some allowances, I'm not being articulate here, but with the wine, but allowances for some of these restrictions that were so strict. They were going to close our business if we, failed a sting at some point, and now they're allowing us to serve it out to people in the alley. It's the way cannabis began. It's kind of amazing. So anyway, I just kind of wonder when all of this sort of we come out of it on this before the next wave starts, what is going to happen? Are we going to have like Patriot Act kinds of infringements on our liberties, but also some weird loosenings on the other side?
Yeah, I think my biggest concern here is looking at a viral threat as something that's pretty nebulous. You can't see it, you can't predict it. A new strain could come out next year, and that's really convenient for someone who wants to use fear as a motivator. I would look back to post 9/11, where we have this nebulous threat of terrorism, which, if it happens in your backyard, of course it's scary, but it can also be used as this never-ending threat that the boogeyman's always right around the corner. And I think as a collective unit, we're all experiencing sort of a shared trauma right now, and we're all going to remember this. And you already see the social tides turning, like telling on their friends, and very, very crazy things that people would never dream of doing a month or two ago. And I think we're going to hold on to that. And I think that it's almost too powerful of a tool to say, hey, we do need to surveil everyone's phones in case the next time comes. Or, yeah, maybe you can pick up weed on the corner, but only if your phone's tracked and they know that your GPS location matches the customer ID from your system or something like that.
Yeah, no, exactly. Do you guys think that some of these Western countries are going to be able to implement these GPS apps like what they have in China?
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
They have it already, I would say, no?
Yeah, they don't even need the applications. They can track the SIM cards too, for a general location at least. They've already got access to all that information through the companies.
It would probably never get as bad as China, though. That's a pretty high standard that they're setting.
It will get as bad as China, and China will get worse. So we'll catch up, and they will get worse.
China's definitely going to get worse. I mean, now you look back, and all they're going to say to people is, the government saved you. You have to comply. It's no going back after that.
There's no resistance to these measures. There's no reason for them to stop until
it's a little bit different, though. I mean, people in the U.S. think like the problems of coronavirus is caused by 5G. Because we have free speech here, it's like there's a mix. There's a lot of people with guns here.
Hey, Kira, can you explain this conspiracy theory? Because I've heard it briefly, but I haven't dug down.
I used to cover the wireless sector at Oppenheimer. It blows my mind.
To explain it,
I've heard it on Twitter quickly, but I don't get the link.
No, there isn't.
There's no link.
Okay.
The idea is if there's something you don't understand, we're going to project things you don't understand into danger, right? So it's like, because you don't understand 5G, all 5G is a way to connect more devices. It's just, it's silly. But because people don't understand it, they'll blame it. It's the same thing with vaccines, right? I can't justify that.
Well,
do you think we should be pushing back
here
more
is that
on
people are afraid. People are not going to push back because they're afraid. They don't think rationally.
People in America will push back.
There's a lot of stupid people on Facebook.
I'm sorry.
There's a lot of stupid people on Facebook. They'll share this stuff.
Exactly. When it's desperation, they'll push back. But it means that your civil rights have been eaten already, by a lot.
When you can't put food on the table, there'll be a bit of pushback at that point. But I don't think it's been long enough for people to truly feel that. So.
If this continues, how long does it take? I don't think it's going to take that long.
Can I ask a question? Because this is what I don't understand. If we've effectively eliminated 90% of all social interactions, like at minimum 90%, no NBA games, no MLB games, no Masters, people aren't flying. And
people are on social media.
Hey man, we're having UFC 249 is coming. Is anyone following that?
Hold on. Wait, what's your point, Parker?
If the incubation period is 10 to 14 days, and we've all been holed up in our homes for a month, there's no like statistical way that more people are contracting the virus today than 3 weeks ago. Like unless the contagion rate's like 10x higher. So there's some source of this one, which the question is like, is it actually possible that more people are contracting the virus today, or is it just panic induced on social media and the media?
I think I have my perspective on this is that what they were trying to do by having a lockdown is stop individuals from getting it at all. Now what's happening is that individuals are spreading it to families. So it's like one person has it, they're asymptomatic for 14 days, they spread it to their whole family.
But if 90% of social interactions are eliminated, like that would have been happening anyways. So like
we haven't had complete lockdowns in a lot of the country until, just Florida was just last week,
Exactly.
Maybe that's the.
And there's travel between these areas in the US.
But still, like it's significantly lower. And there's like, it's clear that the virus was in the United States.
It's not a problem for individuals. If you and I are on quarantine, there's no problem for us. Like if you're on quarantine, I'm on quarantine, we have nothing to worry about. The problem is for the healthcare facilities because they don't want the hospitals to be overrun, right? So it's like, if you let people go out, even if it's just a few people, then all of a sudden healthcare workers start dying. And like, that's why the state is getting involved in this, is because like there are people who are, I'm diagnosed with cancer, but I can't go to the hospital because everyone there has coronavirus. Yeah, it's like the entire
because on the other side, I've heard other things as well, like hospitals who were ready for COVID, who like redirected other patients that were non-COVID to other institutions and ended up being empty, because they didn't get the flood of patients that they were expecting to get. And now they're going bankrupt. They're having problems with cash flow and solvency. They have to take loans. They have to get rid of people. They have to cut salaries. And you're like, okay, like it's weird because at the beginning, we sort of like the government understood the problem by saying, no, it's fine. Don't worry. It's just a flu. Nothing, no big deal. It's only in China. It won't come to our borders. And then people freaked out and they overshot. And so it's like.
But this is the problem with central planning in general, right? It's like in Chicago, they're building secondary hospitals because it will overrun the existing hospital system. But, you can't quite plan for that.
But when the hospital is going to be built, the disease will be gone.
Well, they're already built.
So it'll be.
No. In the US, they're already built. But they're sort of waiting for the peak, and if they don't get a peak, I think they would probably be disappointed because they did.
Did the Washington one just disband? Like they cleared it out and they're sending the ventilators to New York, New Jersey.
What's that?
There's a hospital they set up in Washington, and they nobody showed up, so they disbanded it. And they're sending all the ventilators over here.
The one in Chicago was it's one of the biggest facilities, like biggest convention halls that we have in the city, and it's so far not close to being overrun. But again, this is because they have the lockdown.
Yeah.
Parker, to your point, man, you wouldn't.
Casualties. Yeah. No. Go ahead, Tom. Sorry.
So, I was just gonna say, Parker, to your point, like I totally agree with you, but like you wouldn't know for 3 weeks, right? And like if everyone's staying home, they're also not getting tested, so it's kind of like a delay in actually finding that out.
Yeah. No, I recognize that. I think but it's just statistically like if the virus, because people look at testing and they look at deaths. And it's like, well, if you're testing tens of millions of more people than you were a month ago, tens of millions of more people or hundreds of thousands are going to test positive. And like, it just seems to me that there's no practical way that more people are contracting the virus today than there were 3 weeks ago. Yet people are still in this mindset of we're not going to go back to normal, and we probably won't until June, which in my view is like we're going to have a global depression if we don't start like tomorrow or a week from now.
Wow.
And I think that it's
global depression is happening.
Yo, so hey,
like, we don't even know what that means. Like we throw the term around, and it's like tens of millions of people not working for years. Like we throw the term around, and it's like thrown around loosely. But like that, there's serious consequences of that. And it's like we can't use that terminology like we're going in a global depression, because if we were,
forget the terminology. I would say just let's observe what's happening.
Because let me just finish the point. It's that because we are using it, like we're saying depression. If we're even thinking about depression, people should be going back to work tomorrow. Like that outcome is so much worse than hospitals being overrun. People getting sick.
I don't disagree.
Yeah.
Hey,
So
one thing that's been affected by that, outside of all the lives and potential depression like you're talking about, is people not traveling. Oil has been super effective. Has been the price of oil has been a topic of much interest and volatility the last couple of weeks. Maybe to kind of move to that topic a little bit, Steve, Juzica, you've been tweeting about it a little bit. What are y'all seeing on the ground from energy producers, oil producers, natural gas folks, and just thoughts there? Also, a question from Periscope.
Yeah, I'm seeing a ton of fear in the industry. Some of like the bigger companies in Canada that have always been able to resist like short-term like downswings in prices are laying off just insane amounts of people. My wife works at a large energy company here, and for the first time probably ever, I'm sort of worried that like with our job security and stuff, but it's definitely the worst I've ever, I mean, I'm pretty young, but I think it's the worst time to be in oil and gas in the history of Canada for sure. But yeah, I'm expecting to see a wave of bankruptcies. Like, I mean, I work in oil, right? Like most of you guys know that, but the Bitcoin mines, like we deploy a lot of the sites, like when we're deployed on oil wells with their vent gas problems or the flare gas problems, a lot of these guys have shut everything in. So it's affected my business, but the nice part of my business, of course, is that we have the Bitcoin hedge. So we're actually on some sites, the only sites, a couple of the producers that we're on, like they're running our sites because they're still making money off the Bitcoin rigs, whereas they can't make any money otherwise. I think I'm speaking from the Canadian.
Is that mostly in Canada?
I got some customers in the States. You know what's funny? Like natural gas prices have been just so bad for so long. Oil has been doing relatively well compared to natural gas for quite a while. And right now, like guys, I know some guys, that just have natural gas wells and they're mining Bitcoin. I've sold some rigs to these guys, and they're better off right now than all their peers. All their peers selling gas to the market are getting wrecked. All the guys producing oil are getting wrecked. Like, so the guys that are actually just mining Bitcoin on gas are actually doing pretty good. But yeah, I think business is bad in basically every industry right now. But I don't think anything's worse than oil and gas right now, or at least, I mean, I'm biased, but it's pretty bad. So I don't know. We'll see.
Are you getting any inbound interest from folks who are using Bitcoin kind of as a way to get by now? Are they talking to their industry peers, and are you getting any inbound stuff from other folks?
Yeah. Like we even made some sales. Like sales is down for sure, just because it's so much. Well, first of all, it's down because oil and gas producers are not spending any money. Like they've told all their employees you're not spending a dime. So that's obviously a problem for sales. But I've actually had some, to mine Bitcoin, you generate power. There's hundreds and hundreds of service businesses in oil and gas that build engines, sell gen sets, sell, power generation skids. These guys a lot of them have come to us recently, or at least reached out, and we just sold a couple this month to guys that, could even be like competitors in the future, but they're seeing that like they don't see a light at the end of the tunnel right now. So they're thinking, okay, they're hearing about this whole Bitcoin mining thing in oil and gas, and so at least the Canadian ones, they know like we have a decent presence, so they're finding us, and so that's what I mean when I say we're lucky that there's a bit of a, I have a bit of a hedge, right, with the whole Bitcoin thing. Bitcoin's independent from the politics of oil and gas. So I'm lucky that that's the position I'm in with my business. But yeah, it's unfortunate because before this business, I was working with a pump business, a service company. And I had a call with them today, just a friend over there, and yeah, like it's just desperate. They've laid off most of their employees, and they're just hoping something changes in like the next little while.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's brutal.
Hey, Parker, y'all touched on this in that podcast with Marty, you and Cal Bass, on this topic of like, everybody's just going to be going out of business at a certain point. What are your thoughts on that? What are you hearing out of Texas on the U.S. side? What should the government do for the shale industry, if anything? And you're on mute.
Yeah, I've got a number of friends that are in the oil and gas business, and I think echo similar thoughts as Steve. I had a conversation last night, and kind of one of the viewpoints was that it was basically like and I don't even know if you refer to them as mid majors, but anything other than like the Exxons and the Shells, like basically making comments like, just rattling off names that are large E&P companies, and like these companies are all going bankrupt, like all of them. If and in my view, I think there's a lot of just given the climate where everyone's like bail out this and bail out that, and buy corporate junk bonds, that there's a sense of like we need to bail out West Texas, or North Dakota or wherever it is. And so I think that everyone clearly has a sense that it's different than 2014 and 15. I think that it's one of those consequences of if you just shut down the economy for 3 months, it's energy demand is inelastic until you shut the economy down. And that but I think in my view, from what I'm hearing, it's that absent some OPEC deal, that people are expecting oil to be in the low 20s or high teens, and that means a lot of shale producers are out of business. But I think on the other side of that, my perspective is that that will recover as well. It's those if people are not producing at the marginal cost that makes it profitable, it'll go away, and those that can will survive. But yeah, there's definitely
like mining.
Yeah, but then the other thing that they bring up is they bring up at least the context that I have that are in the oil and gas business, they bring up the fact that if you're competing with nationalized oil, that those businesses are inherently subsidized, and they talk about the need for tariffs, and I'm sympathetic to certain of those ideas, but the other time it's kind of let it restructure, and the entire market will become more efficient as a result. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of fear.
I got a quick follow-up to that for Parker and Steve. I know, or at least I saw that like OPEC was supposed to have a meeting today to potentially discuss cutting 10 to 15 million barrels per day. Have you guys heard anything about like their meeting today, or if it happened, or any kind of subsequent fallout from that meeting?
I didn't. I don't like pay a lot of attention to that kind of thing, but I'm sure they will. But the reality is, there's going to be cuts just from economic reality. Like any private business right now is going to. I know some guys. A lot of guys have hedges, right, and they can keep producing for a while at least. But there's going to be production cuts, and some of it will be state mandated, of course. I don't agree with state mandated production cuts. Alberta did that a few months back. The price of Canadian oil is a bit different than even like West Texas. Like we've always gotten a worse price with Western Canadian Select and the like. But I expect Alberta to mandate a production cut at some point, and I know some big producers support that idea. I certainly don't, because it's it's a statism. So, but I think just economically, you're just going to see guys, they can't keep going. So yeah, production cuts are coming for sure.
So I have a question. Like, obviously right now the state is kind of propping up a lot of companies. All these states around the world are just trying to keep people afloat. They're not letting anyone die. Like, what are like the long-term effects of these things? Like, I feel like allocation of capital is already kind of fucked up. Like, I can't imagine it's getting any better. Any thoughts around like what are the long-term implications of this kind of central bank behavior? Maybe Tom, you want to start off? Have you been thinking about this at all?
Yeah, I'm not too much up the macro rally, so I'll probably leave it for you guys. I spend probably too much of my time on consulting on crypto econ nowadays. But to answer your question and echoing thoughts of, I think it was Kira, but I think it was Brooke. Once you go down this route, it's really hard to get this stuff back. companies, sectors, they're all going to expect this government intervention. They're always going to think they can get bailed out. Everyone's going to take insane amounts of risk. There's no turnaround. Like bankruptcy isn't a bad thing. Like you could delever, you could come out as leaner companies, you could be more efficient. There has
New
to be
ownership.
like
What's wrong with that?
exactly, yeah. Like you could buy up assets, you could restart a company. There has to be things that you can do to get companies and have be able to take risk. Like why buy bonds? Why buy equity? Why stay in cash? It's different risk spectrums, and once you screw with that, and everybody knows that, everyone's just going to go and look for that needle every time. And I think that's a really bad signal to send a capitalist economy, but we'll see.
Chuthika, did you hear that question?
I heard the answers, but maybe if you could start with the second half of the answer. Maybe if you could just repeat the question real quick.
Yeah, what's like the long-term effects of like all this central bank behavior? Like obviously right now maybe they're giving out relief, but ultimately in the long term they're kind of messing with allocation of capital and kind of propping up these businesses. Like have you thought about the long tail effects of this?
Yeah, I mean, and I think so I come from I was a volatility trader, and so I think about just like the kind of surface of companies. I mean, it completely upends just how you think of that downside risk. And I think it was one thing when in 2008, well, first, I mean, it was crazy in 2008, but at least they let Lehman go under, which was sort of Lehman and Bear actually were both kind of like signals to the market in a way, and then they bailed out the banks that conceivably were actually too big to fail in some ways. And you can argue maybe the trickle down effects, it was the right thing to do. But I think the more that this stuff happens and the more that it starts happening to ancillary industries, the more that it's just going to completely change the nature of risk, the whole risk reward calculus. And I don't think that I don't really fall into the camp that so many of these CEOs are actually, that it's actually like a moral hazard issue. I don't think they're sitting there being like, oh, let me use this debt for things that, for buybacks and stuff like that, just because I know that when the rainy day comes, if I don't have the capital, I'm going to get bailed out. It's not necessarily that nefarious, but, at the same time, they are going to be under pressure to perform in bull markets. And that's the fear that like a startup might have of like, hey, I need to make sure I have enough runway. If they know that they're going to, have the lobbying interests, which they all have, and be able to, now the precedent's been set across so many industries, be able to do it again and again. It's not great. And I think we'll feel the effects. Like it's nice now in the short term for, ostensibly for those companies and stuff, but everyone will be feeling the effects in the long term inflationary wise.
Yeah, definitely.
Got a question from Periscope on inflation. We've really got the dollar becoming stronger. What are y'all's thoughts on inflation in the U.S. dollar and kind of world currency?
Let's
market?
Go to Tina.
Tina.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I don't want to answer that question. I want to come back to answer the question that Juthika and Tom just answered.
Go to the earlier question. Yeah.
Okay, so here's how I see things. In 1987, the stock market crashed, and post-crash, I had a guy who told me a story who was working at a major investment bank at the time that they were told that they would buy stocks post-crash. And they pushed back at the Fed. They said, no, we can't buy stocks because it's going to put us out of business. They said, you don't understand. You'll buy stocks. They bought stocks. In 89 through 92 approximately, could have been 93, they took rates down to 3%. And that was starting to signal what was going on. The system was already starting to get into trouble. We rode through the 90s, we went through Mexico. Went to the tech media telecom bubble, but before tech media telecom, the tail end of that, we actually had two crises. You had the Thai crisis and you had long-term capital management crisis. Post long-term capital management, on Thursday afternoon at 3:00, the Federal Reserve cut rates when the markets were doing extremely badly. They cut rates at about 3:00. I was short out the gazoo at the time, long a lot of puts, and watched my gains just got cut in half in about 5 minutes as the market gapped up. That was the first signal. It was the first shot across the bow by the Federal Reserve that they're targeting the U.S. stock market. Unfortunately, I was not smart enough to figure that out at the time. In front of Y2K, the Federal Reserve saw and said, don't worry, we're going to monetize. I didn't actually use those words. They said, don't worry, we're going to make sure that nothing happens for Y2K. So if you look at the annualized monetary base and adjusted reserves, it jumped off the page at around October of 1999 to an annualized number in the neighborhood between 30 and 60, 70%. NASDAQ was very, very hot. All that money went to NASDAQ. NASDAQ doubled approximately from October into the peak, which was around the end of February. I bought a lot of options. I bought a lot of stocks, made a lot of money, and I sold everything January 2nd because it was obvious to me they would yank it all out. Lo and behold, they did yank it all out. NASDAQ crashed 40%, and you could see it all show up in adjusted reserves and monetary base. We then went through the tech media telecom bubble burst. They took rates to 1%. Greenspan went in his pants. He took rates from 3% down to 1%, and they created the housing bubble. The housing bubble, they left rates there too long. They inverted the curve for 21 months approximately, which is the same as my taking your arm behind your back and lifting it up over your head until I break it out of your shoulder. They gave us the housing bust, which was a complete and utter disaster. They left wreckage along the way, and they gave us the sovereign debt bubble. Lo and behold, they left rates at 0% for about 8 years. And then they did the replay of inverting the curve from around, I forget the exact dates, but they crapped their pants at the end of 2018, and they made a mess of rates. Then they took rates up to 2.5%, which was enough to break everything again. And we started seeing weakness show up with repo numbers in September 2019, blowing the system out. Fortunately, Corona came around, which was able to take the hit for all of this, and we have been able to start MMT, start UBI, start massive Fed bailouts, and this is now officially the beginning of the end. This is now 30 plus years of bad policy. This is not a one-off event. This has gone on for 30 plus years. This is obvious to me. It should be obvious to everybody who has any sense of perspective on what's happened in the last 30 years. Stocks feel great when they're going up and nobody wants to pay attention. This is very serious. The world is going to catch up to Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is going to go to insane numbers. The difference between this go round and 2008 and 9 is you're going to see velocity. You're going to see inflation. This is going to be a problem for companies that, yes, they make revenues, but they also have expenses. You can't have a PE go to infinity, and it's not necessarily going to be good for everybody's margins. On top of that, we have this little breakage here where the economy isn't working at all right now, so I don't know exactly what happens here. I call myself Bitcoin Tina because there is no alternative. And it's really a shame, but the system's irreparably broken, and I don't see any other answer to this. And so little by little, people are going to come to understand what the situation is, and they're going to start to acquire Bitcoin. North of 20,000, you're going to see the world begin to slowly pile in, and you're going to see the first mainstream bull market, which is going to blow people away on price, and it's going to hit numbers that nobody can imagine. It's going to be very high in the next 2, 3, 4 years, and it will be truly shocking.
2021,
I agree with everything he just said. Yeah, when the next bull run hits and it goes that, I mean, when you see the mining industry and the amount of chatter over just, you know, the energy FUD, energy waste crap that you get from the media, just even the last bull run. I mean, the next one, especially what he's going on with setting up the next bull run, all the crap that's going on in the world. The amount of energy that it'll get put into Bitcoin mining will be astounding. And it's going to, I think it's really going to shake a lot of feathers all over the world. So I can't wait. It's going to be great.
I don't disagree with any of that. And I think that will happen. It's very difficult to pin a date to it. What I would say as a yes and is that Yeah, yes, and what is going to happen to the US dollar when the Fed is giving itself the power to buy basically all of US companies? Right? Like what's going to happen when think about the average person in the US who's begging for a bailout. This strengthens the Federal Reserve. You know, and we can talk about it as if this is always a net negative, and maybe in the really long time scale it is. But in the short term, this does add a lot to the power of the Fed and the US government in addition to that.
Yeah, so what about the dollar? We've learned a lot about the dollar in the last few months, like the strength of liquidity in the system.
They became the world central bank, not just the US central bank, but now because everyone is holding the dollar. I don't see in the long term, this is great for Bitcoin. In the long term, this is terrible for the dollar. But I don't see how this is not a win for the dollar in the short term. Because people,
I think the tides are turning against the US. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, just one thing. I mean, the Fed has been the global central bank for 20, 30 years, and particularly since the financial crisis. So,
not at this scale, but yes.
Well, I mean, going back 10 years ago, there was 10 trillion of cross-border credit, and the next largest cross-border denominated credit was the euro, 1 trillion. So just by that mere fact alone, the way that the Fed goes and the Fed's monetary policy, it was, they were causing every other central bank to act and follow their lead. So, and that's why kind of in 2008, they had to open swap lines to all other central banks. And so I think that's always been the case. I don't think that the Fed is now stronger. I think that, if anything, for more people, it's accelerating the idea that, they're the Wizard of Oz, that behind, there's this idea that the Fed is in control and that they can, work our way through this. And if anything, I would say that, if a certain number of people understood that 60 days ago, probably 10 times more people understand that today. Now, that doesn't mean that that's an overwhelming percentage of the population. And I think that the reality is that the way that the Fed system is set up, that the Fed can create trillions of dollars while still having to fight a tsunami that is a global deleveraging event. And that, everybody should be very cautious, especially in the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months of the implications of supply chains breaking down. Yes. And, people, when they get this cash, they're not going to be taking risks. They're going to be trying to shore up their own balance sheets.
That's true. That's until exactly they buy big companies.
What the Fed wants.
So from my understanding, the Fed has already involved itself in something like 6 or 7 American companies to the point where they could probably demand an equity, like a share, a large proportion of the company. They could own it, right? But they don't want to publicize that at this point in time. They want to wait 6 months or whatever it is, right? And if that's the case, if the Fed is powerful enough to buy up some of the largest companies in the world, yes, that's great for Bitcoin, but I don't want to undermine how terrifying that is in the short to medium term. Like you don't want a government owning part of capitalist countries, part of American companies. They did
it with the banks. They did it with the banks. They did it with AIG.
No, you're totally correct that they did it with the banks, but it's different when they branch out from the banks to other sectors.
One question from Periscope. Don't want to derail this too much because it's an interesting thread, but as you talk about this, maybe someone saying implications for the world order, kind of geopolitics wise. We've had this system of kind of the reason the Fed's in the position that it is kind of coming out of World War II and the end of the Cold War. What implications are there for the world order out of this potentially, and especially if there's hyper Bitcoinization? Maybe Kiara, you can continue on your thread too. From Periscope.
I mean, I hesitate. I'm getting safely here because from my perspective, I don't see how this isn't a major win for the US dollar. Countries are holding the dollar. That's not like other currencies. Like if you look at China, right? They have the ability to, make all the stuff that we need, but at the end of the day, no one wants their currency. And Bitcoin has a huge value add in that it's scarce and that people like you and I and everyone on this call want Bitcoin, but we're a very, very, very small percentage of the population. And you have to understand that the world is large. There's billions of people here, and people survive on the US dollar. And it's not, I'm hesitant to say that this is the moment where you have hyper Bitcoinization. I would love that to be the case more than anybody, but I think we should proceed with caution here, because
I would say the
has
US
the power to print money. They have the power to buy. They have the power to buy everything.
Yeah, I would say the US dollar is going to bankrupt a lot of emerging markets as well, as everybody tries to acquire the dollar. It's going to go up, and so all the emerging market debt that is denominated in USD is going to go up, and so all these markets are essentially going to scramble to service their debt and obligations. And I think this is where we've seen China go to the market already and sort of be the hero of the day, say, don't worry, we're gonna provision you the masks in Europe if you need them. Happened to France, happened to Spain. I know that a few regions in Spain were like fighting because the decision making is at the regional level, and they were fighting for like supplies, and China was like, don't worry, we'll ship it there. So anyway, the point here is, for debt, I think China is going to be really, really helpful for a lot of emerging markets, in particular in the African continent and in Latin America. And so what you're going to see probably, and this is me speculating on this, but this is why we're here for, is China just being the great victorious country. And sure, I agree with you, Kiara. People don't care about the Chinese yuan, but if they can get sort of a little bailout or a little support to service their USD denominated debt, then why not? And all of a sudden you have China acquiring, humongous amounts of productive assets and a bunch of strategic countries, whether it's ports, whether it's, companies producing very strategic resources in different countries. And so all of a sudden, China is going to go from the early losers who got crushed by a little virus that everybody was, sort of like discounting, to the nation that rises, that sort of beat the virus in a few weeks, and now is sort of like bailing out everybody because they can print, because they have this dual currency system that allows them to like do that in a very.
They can print their currency, and that works in their country. But the value of the dollar is that it works globally, right? We were talking about oil
for now, but global reserve
for now, but that's
they've died in the past.
Neil, I want to hear your take on this.
I think the sentiment is starting to turn against the US, and I think already you're starting to see places like Russia and China and elsewhere increasing their gold reserves, reducing their US dollar reserves.
They just stopped buying gold. They literally just said they stopped buying gold. Russia.
Right, but I think if you look at the long-term trend, they've been increasing their gold reserves.
China for sure.
They're also mining Bitcoin.
And in addition to that, like, this coronavirus issue is definitely inflaming tensions. It's creating a lot of animosity. The US is blaming China quite publicly. China is also blaming foreigners in the US. Just at the kind of street level, the ground level, people, like, for example, in Chiang Mai in Thailand and in China, are blaming foreigners for not walking around with masks on, because generally Asian people are very quick to put their masks on. All of the foreigners, the expats and stuff, took very, very long to start putting those on. And there's a lot of blame going around. A lot of people kind of talking about rumors about the virus being a bioweapon from the US. So, like, that's going to turn a lot of public opinion against the US specifically, but also foreigners in general. And like, we don't know how long this is going to go on. So you've got that going on at the same time as people kind of starting to wake up to the fact that they're dependent on the US dollar, but like, that allows the US to kind of screw them a lot.
Right. Like, if the value of the US dollar goes down 10, 20%, that doesn't matter to the government. It matters to us. You know what I mean? It's like they just print more money. And I think, is that a drinking word? I'm not sure if it is. Print.
Drink and drink. I think you got
2 drinks.
I think we all need a round of drinks.
Yeah.
Drink break. Get a refill.
So, and as well, I don't think we can't discount the fact that like, if this thing turns into a gigantic economic disaster, it's going to strain tensions between countries. There's potential wars on the cards when people are going hungry and they're looking for people to blame. And anything could happen. And you could have people just reneging on the debt and starting wars over it. And like
the issue
countries just like totally like cutting themselves off the US dollar and like just crazy things that we can't even imagine.
I've had a couple of drinks of wine, so now I'll say this. I think the issue of people going hungry isn't a concern, at least in the US, because we produce food. You know, we don't produce plastic and toys and manufacturing, but we do a really good job of making corn. Okay, so like people will get food in America. The problem is, it's like what happens psychologically when someone is getting paid because the government bailout extends for past 3 months. At a certain point, it becomes more beneficial to you to receive the UBI, the Universal Basic Income, than it does to go back to work. Especially if we're talking 18-month timelines.
Shoot bucks.
And politically, oh yeah, sorry, go ahead, man.
No, I was gonna say, I don't mean to interrupt you, Tib. We see this skit from the head of Barstool Sports bitching about money printing, and it seems like everything, all Twitter is starting to sound like Bitcoin Twitter, which is kind of crazy.
If anyone else follows Black Twitter, that's a real thing. And people are like, why do I work if I could get money for free? The whole thing is a scam, right? It's like everything is sounding like Bitcoin Twitter now.
Yeah, I want to hear Dan's thoughts on this. Dan's like, what are your thoughts on like the perpetual money printing? Also, drinking from me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's like too much that I can like necessarily add. I think we've covered kind of like the institutional and corporate side of it, but I think that was something that I was like thinking about earlier. It's kind of like the UBI / like student loan forgiveness aspect of it, and I think that's becoming such a more prevalent conversation in the U.S., especially of people that I think were on the fence before of UBI and should people get basic income for not working and like and that type of stuff, but especially with kind of these. The stimulus package and then with the student loan, like they've already, I believe, like offset payments for 6 months. But I feel like we'll get to a point where they just go, no more student loans or no more interest or things like that. So I think that's kind of the aspect that I'm like kind of perplexed by and interested to see how that develops. Like I think
no more student loans. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, I don't think they're just gonna like wave a wand and they all disappear. But I think like there's been a talk for the last like 18 or so months, probably longer than that, of people that have kind of pushed like the narrative, whether it's Bernie or some other kind of candidates that have talked about student loan forgiveness or waiving student loans entirely. I don't know if we'll get to that point, but I think the discussion of universal basic income, student loan forgiveness, and other kind of state issue monetization efforts, I think it's going to become a lot more prevalent now that it's kind of already here and people are somewhat kind of clamoring for it. As you mentioned, there's when you kind of brought up the fact that people are talking about, should I work or should I take UBI? I think people are starting to question that around taxes as well. Like
even to talk about the difference between 2008 and now, you know, the banks did something wrong in 2008. They failed, right? They did their job very poorly. Today, it's like, okay, people are forced to shut down, so it's not their fault. And it's cheaper to pay people through their company. So if we pay, you know, United Airlines or whatever American flight company it is, it's cheaper to pay them through that entity than it is to pay them through unemployment, right? So you have people on both sides of the political fence saying, oh, wow, UBI is a really great idea. Everyone's clamoring for their share of the newly printed, and I will drink, but the newly printed like currency. I think
twice. You got to do it twice.
I've got to do it twice.
This is the final and like last step of fiat monetary policy. Is the people demand the fruits of the money printer.
But not for what matters is sort of our lifetime, right? And maybe even your children's lifetime. But you know, in my lifetime, I don't see that I'll see the end of it because I'm living through the demise.
Yeah, you will see the hyperinflation of the dollar.
Right.
In our lifetimes, we'll see the hyperinflation of the dollar.
Yes.
100%.
I think you'll see full hyper Bitcoinization. Actually, this is hyper Bitcoinization.
It
This is hyper Bitcoinization. Hat tip.
is.
CK Snarks. What we're doing right now is hyper-Bitcoinization. This is just part of a process. I think you will have Bitcoin as the one and only money in between 14 and 29 years, possibly less. And
what countries
I
is that
don't.
going to benefit the most?
Huh?
What countries will that benefit the most? Who's best positioned for that?
Whoever is smart enough to adopt it first and earliest.
So the U.S., China, and Japan.
Not necessarily.
Whoever
Whoever adopts it first and earliest will have a major advantage for at least a century, because it will reshape their economy in very positive ways. The United States may fight it. I don't know who's going to be the first to adopt it, but whoever is earliest into letting it reshape their country will be in the best position. And it may throw up for grabs the financial centers of this century. It's a
Why
really
would
big
any
deal.
government adopt it though?
Yeah, see, I would say, I'm sympathetic to that. My answer would be whichever country's citizens love freedom the most, because they're going to have the most Bitcoin, and then they're going to be able to reboot the quickest because they're going to have a form of currency that can actually facilitate trade and specialization. But like thinking about it as like which government adopts it first, or it's like
none of the governments will ever adopt it.
Well, I agree with what Parker
money.
said. See, I argue that Bitcoin will be imposed on the world. It won't be picked by choice. It'll be imposed because everyone will chase price, because people love making money. So it becomes something that people want to do because they like making money, so they buy it to make money. And I actually am not. I think that the concern with currency is a much longer run concern. I don't think it's anywhere near term, because there is still too much debt in the system. There's too much dollar-based foreign debt that's hurting a lot of countries. We need the dollar to go down right now. It's really imperative, because a strong dollar is a global wrecking ball.
And it's stronger relative to all the other currencies right now.
Right, but that's very harmful to an awful lot of countries. I've heard the numbers quoted, and I don't remember what the numbers are, but you're talking in 15 trillion dollars.
Well, that's why they feel safe doing these types of stimuluses, though. It's because they're the top dog.
I'm curious about a slightly different angle here. If we see MMT ramp up, we see people begging for money off the printer, we see all this happening. Are people going to wake up and push back and say, like, what is this racket? Are we going to see a bunch of people in Zilker Park, Occupy Wall Street type movement counter to the Fed printing? Or are we going to see people saying, give me the money, and my life's better now? Because in the short term, they see UBI. On the long term, it actually hurts them, but they'll take the short-term win. That's like sort of the question, which side are people going to land on? And if we do see a populist uprising against printing and devaluing our currency here, and whatever the fallout is, how do we capture that anger, that resentment towards the Fed into a large base for Bitcoin? Kind of two parts.
I think like you'll see, in my opinion, I think you'll see like the crowd that goes like UBI from like a work perspective, but I think you're already seeing it on Twitter of like the whole, if they can print as much money as they want, why are we paying taxes? So I think that's going to be like, I think people are going to start getting more like selfish in their interest of what can benefit me. And I think the UBI versus work thing will become more prevalent, but I think if the government can continue to print at will, why are we funding the state? And I think we'll start seeing more pushback on that.
Paying their taxes.
What was that?
The problem is, unfortunately, just because people have said that on Twitter, it doesn't mean they'll ever stop paying their taxes.
Oh, for sure.
Way more. So it's like we're seeing the beginning of the threshold. It's like the bar for what it would take for someone to really, I guess, voluntarily push back on the system is much higher than what we're starting to see. So I don't even want to advocate for it, because it would have to get so much worse, and things are already terrible.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it would have to happen like at mass scale. Like it's not going to be the one individual that says, I'm not going to pay my taxes.
People want like the social, they want to feel as if they're part of a movement, right? And in order for a movement to occur, you've got to get more than that 51% of people in agreement. And that's going to take, I mean, right now, I don't know what percentage of unemployment we're at, but like most of the unemployment is sort of a facade, because I know people that have jobs and like, okay, or I should say people that are unemployed, but their job is still paying them, right? So
Hey, Kira, haven't you read my avatar in the bottom, which says that Bitcoin is a social movement?
no, I'm in agreement. None of that. I'm not disagreeing. My statement is that like a lot of the data that we're taking in as signals for this future and trying to call a date as to when this is going to occur is misleading, right? Like the unemployment numbers are worse than they've ever been, but I know people who are unemployed and their job is still paying them the difference of their unemployment check.
I want some of that. That sounds great.
Yeah, like my friend's a preschool teacher. He's unemployed. He gets paid his unemployment, and then in addition, his job is still paying him. And that there's a ton of people who are registered as LLCs who are getting $10,000 grants. So it's like we need to wait until once people are not asking for the dollar, like when people are like, I don't even, what's 10 grand? 10 grand doesn't mean anything to me. That's when it's a signal to me that there's sure, we're in hyper Bitcoinization, but I mean, real growth is when people don't want the dollar anymore.
I think that starts when people are actually hungry.
Yes.
Right now, nobody's hungry. Nobody's
desperate. Because we have food here.
Yeah, and everyone's hoarding the dollar because it's for the world. It's the most liquid asset.
Yes.
But when
liquidity is key.
Bad. Yeah, and I mean when things get bad though, people aren't going to want the dollar. They're going to want food, and they're going to want to, not have their landlord rip their home.
I agree.
Them, right?
And I mean, it's even weird to say this is unfortunate because it's not really unfortunate, but I don't foresee that in the US to any degree because
why? I asked the same question.
Great food producers.
We're great food producers, but our supply chains are still extremely complex. So
and leverage.
If you can't get, the trucks moving to get, food to the grocery store, or if restaurants go out of business for 6 months and they're buying food from farms or
farmers won't plant crops if they're not going to make.
Hey, let's please try not to talk over each other, Parker.
Yeah. So, in my view, I think we assume so much of the baseline that is that when we talk about the prospects of hyperinflation, it's not just because there's a lot of currency running around. It's because the relative scarcity of money to goods, it's like a dynamic equation that as the money destabilizes, the actual goods that are available become more and more scarce on an absolute basis because they stop showing up on the shelf.
The problem in the supply chain is you have people in America, you have people producing milk, and there's too much milk because the supply chain is broken. So now restaurants aren't buying milk, so you actually have to kill the milk producing cows. Like we have a surplus of food and a dramatic decrease in demand because everyone who was creating the demand on the part of restaurants, they can't just shift into producing for groceries. That's not the way the supply chain works, right? Like if you look at a company like Trader Joe's, their supply chain, they get all their shit from farmers and direct it to their grocery store. And that's how a lot of American grocery stores work. So
right. My whole point is that if we're assuming that with all this economic disruption that those things that all of those complicated pieces still fit together, and that
I'm saying that if 50% of farmers fail, grocery stores still make a killing.
Do they still get food though?
They 100 because the problem is there's
in
so
the US
much,
in the US
because look in the US it's different than Europe. In the US people eat out more than once a week. In Europe it's much fewer, right? So a lot of production of food is intended to go to weddings, events, catering, restaurants. That's being cut by Open Table, which is one of these like restaurant platforms,
zero.
That they saw
go down to zero.
Yeah, so it's like, what do you expect? My expectation is that food continues, which means that plebs are satisfied. I can even put myself in that category. It's like no one will go hungry because farmers.
Kara, let me inject another perspective from Canada here. Like during summer, a lot of the labor that produces food actually comes from Latin America, and so. Because it's cheap labor, it's summer, they have like relaxed labor permits, And so the reality is that movement of labor right now is not going to happen. And so what do you do, right? You still have to produce food. And the reality is Canada is extremely, sorry, what?
There's a huge unemployment crisis in the US. Everyone, you could take 1% of that and people would be employed again. You know what I mean? It's like, there's not.
Sure, but the point I was going to make here is that the US labor or the Canadian labor versus the Latin American labor, let's be real, it's going to be more expensive. And so your cost of production is going up.
Canada,
so for Canada, exactly.
Canada,
for the US, for the US, it's maybe going to be the same thing. For Canada, we're screwed, I think.
Yeah, because you don't produce the food. It's too cold. You're talking about how beautiful it is in Montreal in the cold.
Well, we have I agree with you. It's a tough country.
No, I mean,
the point though is I truly believe because cost of production goes up, like the prices, like retail prices for food are going to go up this next quarter.
In China, that I've watched multiple journalists, they say the food prices didn't actually go up because they produce the food in the country, which is why you probably don't have. That's why you don't have to.
One thing to bear in mind is that we're imagining that the market stays intact, but when prices start going up for everything, price controls are going to start coming in. So we're already seeing it. We're already starting to see it.
And then you have more shortages with price control.
Yeah. So first it starts with price controls. So we're already seeing it with rent and landlords. So very, very soon we're going to see price controls on rent all around the world. Then after that, once food prices start to rocket, you're going to see price controls on food. And when that doesn't work, they're going to start nationalizing the food production. So and everybody knows that the nationalization.
Neil, I was going to say price control on food is already happening here in Canada. Like we have price control.
There you go. And in America.
Quantity, deployment, control as well. Like if I go to the supermarket, I can only get 2 ribeyes. Like there's a limit, right?
Let's talk about misallocation of capital.
Yeah, this is one reason why I do own my own cows. I got 20 of my own cows.
Wow.
Are you kidding? Are you kidding me? Are you sovereign with your cows? Oh man.
Food supply chains get fucked, and I'm gonna be okay.
Texas.
Jolly. Yeah. That's like ultimate sovereignty, man.
Speaking of food security,
until they confiscate
producers. The seed producers in the U.S. are running out of seeds, and they're no longer giving them to retail operations, and they're reserving seeds only for commercial food. And so, although we produce a lot of food here, there is some stress in the system where they're planning for a rainy day.
Like Walmart isn't selling seeds.
Right.
Which is weird. That's
a lot of the bid boxes can't. Their supply is constrained because up the chain.
That's interesting.
They're not giving them seeds.
I think that there's going to be strange things happening with the supply chain. I don't think the supply chain is fine meme is going to last very long.
It just depends on who you are, right? It's like I bought N95 masks in February. Okay, I'm fine. But like if you're someone who wants to buy them in June, you're not fine.
We might have a lot more by June. One question from Periscope, somewhat related. Talking about U.S. dollar, he's saying that really it's enforced by the U.S. military.
Yes.
What do y'all think the implications are? I guess military. Let's go to a dark place, but militarily, what do you say here? Thoughts on that? I guess.
I want to hear what Neil thinks about whether the military gives money value.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, they do to a certain extent because they can force people to pay taxes, right? And if people aren't paying taxes, then you can bring the military in if they're really kind of misbehaving. So to some extent, they create a very small amount of demand for whatever the percentage of taxes are. But aside from that, like people buy money because they know that people are going to accept it. So the answer would be generally not really.
Maybe the U.S. military has probably been keeping all these shipping lanes open for the last however many years because of that U.S. dollar reserve status. Does that change? Does Parker, you're talking about the supply chain systems in the U.S. Do global supply chain change? Supply lanes see a change from this? You guys talked about that a little bit on that podcast with Kyle.
Yeah, and you know, I won't speak on something that I'm not an expert, but kind of in conversations that I've had with Kyle, a lot of that stuff seems to make sense to me. That one of the implications of this is that in general, people will understand that we kind of, whether it's China or, depending on the other areas of the country, that there will be just a tendency to localize or to have greater redundancy locally. And so I can't imagine that it wouldn't change, that people are understanding in so many ways how their kind of ways of life and economies are more fragile than they understood, that the natural response mechanism to that is to protect against that fragility. And how do you do that? You create fewer dependencies on kind of where, doesn't mean that there isn't trade with China or the same type of trade, but it just may be not to the same extent, or recognizing that you need to manufacture certain functions closer to where you are, or not to be susceptible. Now, I personally haven't thought much about what the implications are for the U.S. Navy in controlling, shipping channels, but theoretically there's impacts there too. But I'm not the person to speak to it.
Yeah. We have someone else can comment on that too, but we have Protect Your Key saying hello to Parker and asking Steve thoughts on hash rate this time around at the halving. And then I guess we can kind of talk about that more generally. Just halving's coming up, hash rate. What are we thinking, Steve?
Well, I mean, the halving's basically like a price drop, right? So we've seen just even recently with the price drop, the difficulty trended down. What adjusted about like minus 15-18% or something. So I would guess, all things being equal, of course, the hash rate will drop here coming up with the halving. So mining revenue, I guess, is more what I'm concerned about. That's probably it's not going to get cut in half just because the difficulty will adjust, but it'll be worse, right? So, but then there's a whole school of people that think right away after the halving, prices will start. People get excited and prices will start jacking up and countering that. But I guess we'll see. I don't really know. I can't really make any, useful predictions, but I'm still buying old hardware. So hopefully that works out for us.
All right. What hardware are you buying?
I exclusively buy S9s. They're super cheap. They're like workhorses.
How are the supply chains for miners these days? Is there any disruption?
I buy in relatively small batches, like a few hundred at a time, every couple weeks, but because we're still pretty small. But
are they like secondhand from North America, or are they coming over from Malaysia and China?
Most of the stuff I get right now is through brokers, like in Canada. But I get stuff shipped up from the States. I usually, like I said, because I'm only buying used hardware for my business, it just makes sense for the type of business I'm in. So I'm not, it's very rare for me to buy something from overseas, for example. But I can imagine, I mean, the supply chains on everything else have been disrupted. So I can only imagine it's the same with ASICs.
How does that disruption affect the hash rate? Like, do you guys think that this is gonna like quell if like there's a sustained disruption in the supply chain? Is that gonna really quell the Bitcoin hash rate increase?
Yeah, I don't see why. Yeah, I guess it would. I mean, I think it just comes down to delays. Like, there's a disruption and there's a delay in project execution. I've had delays in building some of the stuff we've been building just because, simple stuff like electrical panels are delayed. So, yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, it probably has some effect on suppressing the hash rate. I don't see why it would, boost it. But yeah, I don't know how.
China's getting back to normal now as well, right?
Is that
Taiwan
true?
was never
Is it?
affected.
I just ordered a bunch
John,
of generators.
you can speak to it more because you've been there more recently, but maybe you're still there. But China definitely, according to all the reports, friends, colleagues, people are getting back out. Factories are back up and running.
Yeah.
So like whatever disruption there is, there might be a lag time on that, but it'll be fairly short.
Yeah, I think FedEx, this was even a couple of weeks ago, FedEx said that they're kind of at 90% in terms of their big manufacturing customers in China about a week and a half ago. And everything I've heard anecdotally, I'm in Nashville now, but is that, everyone's back in the office, everything's kind of getting rolling again.
Yeah.
We have somebody asking, CK might nix this question, but is it having already priced in? Something everybody always asks, but somebody wants to know.
Of course.
It's the most predictable thing in Bitcoin. You'd think it's priced in.
The next 3 halvings are priced in.
Future transactions
Every
can't
future
be priced
halving
in.
was priced in from day one.
Future transactions can't be priced in.
Future transactions.
Roll with that, Tina?
Future transactions cannot be priced in. It's dependent on what future transactions are. We can't price those in.
You mean the halving's a function of transactions? Is that what you're saying?
No, the prices are a function of the transactions. You cannot price that in.
I think he's saying psychologically, like.
Well, I think he's saying that like you don't know. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No. I think maybe we're in agreement, but to me, it's like, okay, well, it really is the fee price priced in, right? It's like, okay, if there are fewer Bitcoins and the free prices are potentially higher, like, is that priced in? Well, no, not until people experience that, in my mind.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that I think about some is that we learn information at the halving that we could only forecast, and then we start to figure out the real kind of flows, or not, we don't know it, but we start to, via the market, understand collectively.
Don't trade on fundamental Bitcoin protocol information. They're trading off of buys and sells.
Yeah, and then I think the other thing that Tina was saying is that, we don't know when somebody who has $20 million wants to come into the market and buy, and there's just no way to forecast that. And I think that the short story is, because a lot of people debate the efficient market hypothesis. In my view, there is no efficient market, because the market's constantly dealing with imperfect information. Like, clearly over time, if the supply of Bitcoin is hardening and more people are figuring out about it with knowledge that at some point there becomes a demand imbalance and an overreaction as people chase it. And that probably happens sometime in the future, and it will probably happen after that.
But calling the exact date is hard. And that's just something that
I never attempt to.
Trying to be responsible about it.
I think we may know about the value though, right? The valuation model, like whether it's stock to flow, whether it's like the scarcity model, like we know that the Bitcoin has been underpriced since its inception and will be underpriced until we reach equilibrium, whether it's like, the SAT to dollar parity, or even when the dollar becomes irrelevant. And so I think that the point here is the price is always trying to catch up with the value. And personally, like, I know that the value, it keeps going up. So that the fact that it's priced in or not, like as long as the price is under the value, like it doesn't really matter, right? Like, and maybe it may be priced in for us in a way, like we know that the price is under the value, but we're Bitcoin Twitter. It's a very small minority of market participants.
Yes, I would. Yeah.
Bitcoin Twitter. Hey, I wish Justika were here to comment on this, but kind of the options pricing out there. Is anyone saying anything interesting there?
I only buy spot physical Bitcoin and move it to myself.
Great answer.
Same answers, Parker.
Buy or mine.
I mean, in the past, I've tried everything and got wrecked on everything, whether it was trading, whether it was leverage, whether it was buy low, sell high, and you learn by being burnt, and then you just stack sats, and yeah.
Stay humble and stack sats. I feel like this entire crisis is about like deleveraging. Like, the people that are getting the most fucked in this crisis are those who are most leveraged. It's not who is the savviest. It's not who was the most prudent business person. It's who was the person living most within their means and just deleveraging. So I don't know. I feel like that's a strong theme, and that kind of feeds perfectly into Bitcoin, right? Like the death of debt and the rise of equity.
That I agree with that. I agree with that completely. And what I would tell people is keep plenty of cash for your expenses. Buy less Bitcoin. You need much less than you think you do, because it's going to go to prices you cannot possibly imagine. My minimum target is 20 to 50 million of Bitcoin. That's going to happen very fast. It's going to happen all in your lives.
Base
Might not happen in
case.
mine. What's that?
Base case.
Base case. No, it's true. I think you're going to see.
Isn't that bearish?
No, that's in today's dollars. When they hyperinflate, you can add a whole bunch of zeros to that. But in all seriousness, I think you'll see and I'm only talking in today's buying power. You don't need that much Bitcoin by 2030, sometime between 2028 and 2032. It's going to be measured in the millions of dollars in today's buying power. You need to be able to make it from here to there. Yes. If you have to cross the Grand Canyon, Grand Canyon isn't just a little hole that you have to traverse. You have to be able to make it from this side to the other side. Don't over-position yourself. Have enough cash. It's not going to be that long, but it might be hard. Don't be a forced seller. Have enough cash so that if other people are stupid, you take advantage of them. There are a lot of people who were leveraged when it broke from 10 to 3,800. There are people who picked up really cheap Bitcoin down there because they were not sitting with leveraged positions in places like BitMEX and getting themselves wrecked. So people took advantage of that and will get super rich off of that. So be opportunistic. Have buying power, and you will do very, very well. You need much less than you think you do. One Bitcoin will make you staggeringly rich in 20 to 30 years. And for people who are in their 30s, you're going to have, in today's buying power, staggering amount of money.
I've ever heard.
Wait, say that one more time.
With only one Bitcoin, 20 to 30 years from now, you're going to staggering amount of buying power. You just have to be able to hold on. So you have to be able to be smart about it. You don't need as much as you think you do. You probably already have more than enough. When the world starts waking up to this thing, you're going to go crazy. Think about how fast things happen. Think how fast this crisis happened. We don't understand how fast the world works.
Buy N95 masks. If you wanted to buy an N95 mask in February, you had about 3 days worth of time.
Totally.
And then once it was needed, it was done. Right. And that's what he's talking about in terms of Bitcoin. And I hate to be, adversarial to the idea of hyper Bitcoinization, but that's sort of the role that I choose to take. It's like, yes, Bitcoin will go up in price because that's the nature of the environment that we're living in. It's undeniable. The point is, how do you present that material? Because a lot of people are struggling to buy food. And what's the reasonable sell to those people?
You don't have to sell to them. Prices will go up. It takes very few people. Let me finish, Kira. Let me finish. It takes very little money to reprice to another level. You have a huge number of hodlers who are strangling supply. And if they understand what they have, they're not going to release very much very easily. It will take think about this. Run through the numbers.
I am in agreement with you.
But people will come in. If you're buying Bitcoin at $100,000, you're still buying it very cheap.
So you have to understand. Look at the shirt I'm wearing right now. It says you can buy a fraction of a Bitcoin. Most people do not understand that you can even buy a fraction of a Bitcoin.
That's okay. They'll learn. Don't worry. It doesn't matter right now. Right now, Bitcoin is like
It doesn't matter to
No,
me.
it doesn't. It doesn't matter because at $100,000, it's still cheap. The world will learn. Think about how. No, you're missing the point. You're missing the point.
You should talk in stats.
People learn things. People learn things when it's in their interest to learn. It's amazing how fast and when people want to make money, they're going to learn.
Yes.
And we see over and over again that people actually know how to be smart when they care about something. Trust me, at $100,000, lots of people will care. And you'll have to change your phone number, and you'll have to change your phone number and possibly move. Because
it's not just
I'm
it's
co-opting this one. All right, I think it's time for the last word. We're going on 2.5 hours. So the way this works is everyone takes a turn, kind of giving their last words and their goodbye and chilling whatever they want to chill. So we'll start with Steve.
I just want to add to that last bit there. In my experience, it's certainly trying to sell someone on Bitcoin doesn't work very well. What works is when people see their peers using it. In my specific case, our sales numbers are doing better and better because, when I started, it wasn't like I would have a pretty decent pitch. I was excited to teach these guys, like the oil field producers, right, about Bitcoin and why it was a good choice for them, like to invest in. But it was a very slow uptake. But then, when I get a few units out there, some of these units were my own units. I didn't really get them to buy anything, but I got it on their sites, right? And it was when they saw their peers do it, and the operators are talking. They see these boxes on site. They don't know what Bitcoin is. They can't explain it. They don't, that's not important. But when they see what it is, and they start to understand that, okay, it could be useful to them, and they see their peers sort of set a precedent. That's what I've seen has driven, like, let's say my business the most, is just word of mouth and sort of peer. And I think that's like anything, when you're trying to pitch any new technology, whether it's Bitcoin. I mean, before this, I was doing pumps, like I mentioned earlier, and I did some new pump stuff, and I was out trying to pitch this to guys. It was only after, they installed a few, and then every operator, every blue collar guy in the field was like, this is a dumb idea. I don't want to do it. I don't want to have to learn it. I don't want to have to deal with it. But, when it was out there, and it was, and some of it, some of my stuff sucked. Some of it was decent. But, when they saw it out there, and there was a good word of mouth, that's what sold it. But I don't think it needs to be a sale, like a sales pitch. So I sort of tend to agree with most of Tina's message there. And I think, Bitcoin is just so needed, and the more people, the more it lives on and doesn't die, that's enough. Like, that's going to drive adoption.
Okay, amen to that. Tib, you're next.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'll echo what Steve just said. For me, recently, especially, I've sort of not only stopped trying to pitch Bitcoin, but I've been telling my friends, because that it was not something, essentially, that whenever they were asking me about this, I was sort of like using this reverse psychology trick where, it's like, it's not for you. It's not something that was designed necessarily for our world and the state of our economies. And then, I don't know, you realize that when people are ready, when they've done their homework, when they've read a little bit on it, when they've seen the news, they'll reach out to you, right? And so I don't know. I've tried to be helpful with my peers and friends who are not in the Bitcoin space, and essentially let them know that, when they're ready, when they want to chat, they can chat. But otherwise, I won't be a shiller like I used to be in the early days of my Bitcoin journey. I think it's sort of it's a very personal thing. Money and sort of the getting comfortable with a new form of money takes a lot of introspection, a lot of reflection on your view of the world, because it's sort of like, I used to believe that money had to be tied to a government, right? Had to be tied to politicians and to a country with borders and with law in a particular jurisdiction. So unlearning a lot of these things is quite it takes a whole process. So I think, yeah, I'll leave it there. Bitcoin is very personal, and whenever people get ready, they'll know, they'll feel it, and I think people, like us in the Bitcoin, on Bitcoin Twitter, or even like elsewhere, because the reality is Bitcoin Twitter is a super small circle of hodlers. We'll be here to spread the word.
Heck yeah.
Awesome. All right, let's go with Brandon.
All right, couple quick points here. One, I think we all need to capture the inbound, kind of similar but different from what Dib was just saying there. But the people who are ripe are the people who in 2017 you were trying to shill Bitcoin to, and they just dug their heels in and said no. Those are the type of people who are now texting me, chatting with me, saying, hey, what's the deal? So shill lightly, but capture that inbound. Also on Twitter, we're seeing narratives break down outside of Bitcoin. So any of the altcoiners, the blockchainers, all that nonsense, that's all gone. It was never real, but it's really, really, really gone now. And so let's welcome those people in. Many of us made those same mistakes. Let's welcome them in. Don't make too much fun of them right away. In a year or so, we can make fun of them with screenshots of their tweets. But for now, let's welcome them in. Let's see. Next, in World War II, if you look back, also in the Spanish flu in 1918, those were times when the U.S. government said, hey, food's going to be fucked. We need to grow our own food. And so they came up with these massive campaigns for war gardens or victory gardens. And during World War II, actually 40% of American food was grown in people's backyards and community gardens. So buy the seeds yesterday, just like the masks. In a month from now, there will be no seeds for people to buy. Buy your heirloom seeds, plant your victory gardens for a worst case scenario. Just check your 6 there. And lastly, it is my duty to remind you to take your medicinal mushrooms.
Perfect.
That's it.
Let's go. All right, next is Dan.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I always kind of think back and have a grin on my face when I'm able to kind of have things like this where we kind of talk Bitcoin for 2-3 hours. And I think the community of Bitcoiners around the globe is just such like an amazing thing to be a part of. And like, truly, I'm just privileged to have a small kind of percentage of that community. Another thing that kind of just actually retweeted, Glassnode and Ria just kind of posted that the number of Bitcoin addresses that hold at least one BTC just hit all-time highs at 802,000. So I think that's just like amazing to think that we're getting towards the point where we're going to have 1 million people that have at least one BTC. Just mind blowing to me. And once again, just like such a cool thing. And even like I had responded to and asked her if she had numbers around 5, and she said she didn't have numbers for 5, but for 10, even at 10 BTC, we're seeing it roughly around 150,000 people that have 10 BTC. So like the numbers and the adoption are there. And I think, as Tina mentioned, I think we're really going to get to the point where you start having half a Bitcoin, 1 Bitcoin, and it's going to change your life, your family's life. And I'm just blessed to be a part of it, and appreciate CK you having me on, and always love talking Bitcoin with all of you guys.
Let's go. Kiara, you're next.
I mean, if I'm going to have an end note, what I would say is that I think the way to sell Bitcoin at this point is as an ethical alternative to other fiat currencies in general, right? It's like, it's very hard to compete against the dollar, the euro, the Chinese currency. So from my perspective, I think Bitcoin is an ethical alternative to all these currencies. I think that's a very persuasive argument for a lot of people. I think once people understand, hey, it's not fair that someone playing the Monopoly game can just print all the money to buy everything in Monopoly. Like, people get that that's wrong. How that information is distributed is a bit tricky because the mainstream media is never going to get behind that message. That being said, I still think it's the most powerful message that Bitcoin does have. And that's the angle that I think we should go with. You know, talking about Bitcoin hyperization or all this stuff, how Bitcoin is better than the dollar, like those kind of arguments are harder for people to understand. It's a more nuanced argument. It's a very practical argument, but that's what I've got. And I really enjoyed talking to you guys for the quarantine session. I've drank an entire bottle of my white empathy wine. I think I was the only one following the rules, but I enjoyed it a ton. And I appreciate hanging out with you guys. Most of you I haven't met in person. So I appreciate having met you virtually, and it's been really fun. Thanks for hanging out.
Let's go. That's what we do this for fun. Honestly, that's the number one objective.
You did a great job.
So we're going to go Neil, Parker, then Tina in that order. So Neil, you're next.
So yeah, first off, been great meeting a lot of people and speaking kind of in person. A lot of the people on here I know from Twitter and have either agreed with profusely or got into a few arguments. So it's good to meet you all. Just going back to some of the comments from Bitcoin Tina, that I think one of the questions that came up is like, how much of these UBI payments start getting spent on Bitcoin. I think as soon as the price starts going up, regardless of how hard people are finding it to get by, I think we can expect that people in kind of crazy times will definitely start dumping a portion of those kind of government payments into Bitcoin. And if that starts to happen, it'll be very difficult for governments to continue giving money to people to shovel into Bitcoin. So they're either going to have to clamp down on the Bitcoin on-ramps or find some alternatives, such as like food vouchers or something like that. Are we allowed to shill, Christian?
Of course, that's part of the last word.
Great. Okay, perfect. So I'm a marketing guy. I got to get this in. If there's any traders listening or any traders on the call, I'm kind of a firm believer that this halvening and all the fiscal measures will probably generate a new bull market in the not too distant future. And anybody expecting that, or even not expecting it, but imagining it as a possibility, should really be preparing to get on something like the Liquid network to make sure that they're able to continue making trades. Because if the price is shooting up and you can't move funds around exchanges, you're going to be losing money. So I encourage everybody that's expecting or thinks it's a possibility to happen should start investigating the Liquid network and seeing if it's right for them. If you're a hodler or you're just kind of accumulating Bitcoin for hyper-Bitcoinization, don't use the Liquid network. It's not for that. It's just for traders. Definitely hold it on the main chain. Keep your own keys and all of that. But for traders, definitely start looking at Liquid. And that's my shill over.
All right, Parker.
Well, first, thanks for putting this on, and we're looking forward to the Bitcoin Magazine halvening party. I believe that it's halvening and not having.
Great show. Great show.
Yes, looking forward to that. I'd like to take the opportunity to show Tron.
It's a drink, actually. That was one of the rules here.
That's right. No, but I think that everybody needs to, my general view is I'm extremely cautious kind of with everything that's going on. I think that, one of the troubling tendencies is just like you see the socialists come out in a lot of people. And I think that it's become, we live in a PC culture, and it's, become wrong to say that socialism is bad, but that when we see a lot of our civil liberties being taken away, that I think we talk about it, but not enough people mobilize against it, and I think that's a big risk. But I think that the positive side is that in my view, Bitcoin is a survival instinct. It is inevitable. I do think that it's vastly superior as money to the dollar today, and I think that's hard for people to understand. But I also think that at the end of the day, it's not too complicated, and people are just going to figure it out because one thing's going to continue to maintain its purchasing power and value, and the other isn't. And then the last thing that I would just say is that my inherent view, because we talk a lot about the halvening and bull runs and price going up. But at the end of the day, Bitcoin, my view, or the way I think about it, is money, and it's essentially, designed to facilitate all other economic coordination. And so at some point, Bitcoin is going, and I think through this process, it's going to be adopted by more people. Once it's, in more people's hands, then it's going to be facilitating more day-to-day commerce. And that, I think it's sometimes productive to think about the macro and like what happens in a global depression or what happens that. But realistically, it's everybody making individual decisions, and if people aren't individually working to, execute on where they see themselves being able to create value, none of it happens. It will happen because money is a necessity, and Bitcoin's the best money. But rather than worry about things that are going to happen in 3 months, and 4 months, and 6 months, is figure out how you can kind of, protect yourself and then continue to create value. So, and that's just like one step, ahead of the other.
All right. Thank you, Parker. And thank you for shilling bitcoinhalving.com. You guys, it's going to be this, but a lot. It's going to be this, but a lot longer. 21 hours of Bitcoin celebration leading up to the third block halving. Let's close it out with Bitcoin Tina. Bitcoin Tina, what's your last word?
We're not special. The whole world will figure this out, and we don't have to sell it to them. Orange coin number go up.
Short and sweet, love it.